For me, One Piece is known for its legendary characters, from Jin during the Baratie arc to, of course, the Little Garden with Dory and Broggy in that intense legendary battle for hundreds of years, to, of course, even Pell during Alabasta. I know the memes about Pell, but of course he still took that nuclear bomb for the Alabastan people. And then, of course, there's Blackbeard and Jai. Say what you want about Blackbeard, he had one of the greatest speeches of all time: a man's dreams never dies, and the underrated let them laugh. Then, of course, we have to talk about Nolan. Of course, this is a flashback character, but Nolan's contributions, of course, to him being known as the liar when he was telling the truth was impactful at that. Or even, of course, the connection to Wiper and Skypiea. Wiper and Skypiea definitely was a legendary character because we only seen him in Skypiea. We've never seen him in any other arc, and he was so powerful yet so hard-spirited for his people. And then, of course, there's Rayleigh during Sabaody, and of course how he helped big time against an admiral. And then, of course, there's Bon Clay and Empel Down, and how he sacrificed himself for everyone to leave Empel Down to get to Marine Ford. And then, of course, there's even Crocodile Marine Ford, who, of course, went up against and stopped Ace's execution, went up against Akainu, like had moments against Doflamingo, Jozo, like even tried to get Whitebeard. Like Crocodile was all over the place when it comes to being on whose side he was on. Then, of course, there's Sabo and ASL's flashback and how he tried to go out to sea at a young age and the Celestial Dragon had to stop him. And then there's even Jinbei on Fish Mountain and how he had to trade blood with Luffy in that impactful moment. And then, of course, there's Senior Pink, of course, one of the greatest flashbacks of all time. Made you really have to have a manly tear for him. And then, of course, there's the Minx saying Raizo is safe. That was Zoe's peak. There's also Katakuri, a final villain, really bringing the fans to his side in the whole Gakalen arc. Let's be honest here. People think it was all people rooting for Luffy. People were rooting for Katakuri. I remember when this was happening in the story. And there's also Kozuki Oden and Wano, probably one of the greatest flashback characters of all time. His story was amazing. No people like to mention the end of it when he was dancing like a fool. I still think Kozuki Oden is one of the greatest characters of all time, and definitely is a big one at that. Then, of course, there's Kuma and Egghead Island, whether it be current characters or flashback characters. Kuma definitely is, like, he's the icing on the cake. So we run into characters who just leave an impact, and honestly, if there was a one way to describe this, like chapter 1003, it's the icing on the cake in my opinion, because of course you stick to the end, you're going to realize every detail I'm talking about and notice in this chapter. So like and subscribe for more One Piece chapter deep dives, and we're going to talk about One Piece chapter 1003 today. So the chapter starts off with Bonney learning the truth of Kuma and apologizes to Vegapunk, while also we get a sun-shaped sapphire as her gift from her father, obviously a reference to Sun God Nika, and her and Jinny's disease. But also we learn of Luffy's appearance, like Vegapunk tells Bonney about Luffy and the White Warrior and Nika and how Vegapunk is trying to help Straw Hat Luffy, and just makes me think of the setup for Bonney to join Luffy and maybe set up for Vegapunk's death, though I'll explain that in a separate video. We then get a cut to Saturn telling Bonney her father Kuma is dead, and of course this is very interesting because we have to understand, we all know how Frankie has a connection to Kuma when it comes to pacifistas and the laser beams, of course the Straw Hat ship, the one that Kuma protected. So of course Saturn talking shit saying Kuma's dead, and Sanji and Frankie can't move due to Saturn's ability. And then we even saw Luffy asking for food so he can jump back into Gear 5th, which I loved. Honestly, that panel was funny. But the one panel that interested me the most is Kizaru saying Bonney and Sentomaru. We just recently found out in this flashback how deep Kizaru is tied to, of course, Kuma, Bonney, Sentomaru, Vegapunk. They're all dancing, doing the Nika dance. And now, of course, we learned he had a special bond with them and Kuma and Vegapunk. Like I said, in the flashback, we can't forget that Luffy did one punch to have him not moving, like not be able to move. The fact that Kizaru still can't move, in my opinion, shows how powerful that punch Luffy did to Kizaru's head top. We then see people's reaction to Yonko Luffy in this hostage situation of Vegapunk. Obviously, it's a lie, but you know what it is. The lie is more appealing than the truth. Truth doesn't really matter. And now it's being compared to the Ohara incident, which makes sense, of course. Vegapunk learned of the Void Century and Vegapunk's advancements in the world and how they're trying to spin the narrative. I get it. Dr. Clover is Vegapunk in this situation. They try to kill Dr. Clover for, of course, learning the truth. And we even see Drake asking Ivankov, where will Kuma go if he was a little of himself? And Eva says, well, if it was me, I would want to marry Joas. That's interesting because we know that they both are slaves of Mary Joas. And of course, we're being hunted as slaves on God Valley. Now, of course, Ivankov was right because Kuma did, of course, go to Mary Joas, but he lost half his face to Akainu from a magma attack. And after going to Mary Joas, But of course, Dragon says Kuma is different. Obviously, thinking of Bonney and Egghead Island definitely makes me think Dragon knows where Kuma is. And if Dragon's asking Ivanka where would Kuma go, are we gonna see what we've all been waiting for? A Dragon versus Saturn moment on Egghead Island, making the Egghead Island incident one of the greatest moments of all time. And don't forget the Blackbeard pirates are also looming on the side. So there is so much development with this panel of Dragon and Ivanka, in my opinion. We then cut to Bonney using the Nika powers. It's always weird seeing Bonney using Luffy's double ability, because Luffy has the most ridiculous power in the world. So Bonney using it is always interesting to me, like she did, of course, when she was younger against that Cypher Pole agent 3 years ago. And of course, Saturn, which, like, let's be honest here, she's using the attack on Saturn, but it catches his interest because, of course, Saturn knows about Nika and he even mentions it in his thought bubble. And Saturn says, you're truly a slave daughter, but you still don't know how much about that name. Of course, it makes me think about how Who's Who mentioned the slave ties to the sun god Nika, of course, and how that big connection there. Of course, Kuma's flashback, this reminds me, of course, Bonney was truly never a slave. And of course, Saturn also realizes Bonney doesn't know Luffy was Nika fruit. So, which makes me think, can Bonney go into Gear 5th? Can she, if she's able to do some of Luffy's attacks when he was regular Gomu Gomu no Mi, could she actually get into Gear 5th and do some crazy attacks? As this is happening, we see Luffy is eating good, which is always a good sign. Luffy eating means he's going to get back up very, very soon. And Saturn even notices and says, he's not one of those dumb villains. He's actually one of the smart ones. He says, put some sea stones on that dude. Of course, he avoids wanting to see Nika again. He knows the Yonko Luffy is not someone to be joked at. He literally said that when Kizaru lost to Luffy, he said, I understand, because of course Luffy's power. Now I do gotta say this, when it comes to Saturn and Luffy, they're gonna fight, of course. We also see Kizaru coming to his senses, so Kizaru, someone doesn't have to deal with Kizaru. I think honestly Zoro, Sanji will have to be dealing with Kizaru, so don't be surprised if we see a Kizaru fight, not Luffy. Since he's weakened too, it might be better for Sanji and Zoro to fight him. But of course Luffy will have to take down the Awakened Mythical Zone Gorosei Saturn. It's gonna be Awakened Zoan, Mythical Zoan, and Luffy, and Awakened Mythical Zoan and Saturn. It's perfect matchup. We then of course see Bonnie's age controlling is not working on Saturn, which I'm thinking, is that a reference to Saturn being an immortal? Who knows? And Saturn reveals he gave Bonnie's fruit, of course. Like, you can't give a fruit to a baby, of course. They can't need adult fruit ability. But he did some sort of experiment that, of course, he gave it to Ginny, and it was a success, but an unnecessary fruit at that. And of course, it can see into certain futures, but narrower each time you learn about reality, and says you want to believe in Nika, but weakness made me start to think he doesn't exist anymore. And mentions young Kuma on God Valley saying he wants to save people like Nika because of the Buccaneer legend. So definitely Saturn is doing a lot of Nika talk, right? Saturn also reveals he experimented on Ginny, the 8th mistress of the Holy Land, which I wonder if has ties to Imu being Bonnie's father. That's a whole nother video for a whole nother day. And of course says the failure, of course, was because of the disease, the sapphire disease, and it was passed down to the child. And of course this pissed off Vegapunk, knowing how patronizing the sacrifice of Kuma was, since Saturn was the cause, of course, of this. Like, Saturn was just a piece of trash, honestly, but he's a celestial dragon, so he's actually fitting his character perfectly, so no surprise here. It's like, since Sabaody, we saw Luffy literally punching a celestial dragon. Oh, Zoro almost slashed one himself, so this is not very, very shocking, because coincidentally, Bonnie's the one who stopped Zoro from cutting his celestial dragon. Now we're in this situation. And when Saturn's talking about how he says, like, when you gain a body like me, you can't really understand the life of insects. It's impossible. Another hint at Saturn being immortal, and ties to him also being from the Void Century, the way he looks at humans like they're even worse than the regular celestial dragons. And then of course, probably the most hype moment of the chapter was when Kuma arrives, and I found it funny how, let's be honest, they thought it was a Pacifista, and then they saw the pause. It was a big giveaway. Shout out to the Hand of Liberation reference there. And of course, God Valley, we saw that situation there that went down. And of course, Kuma arrives to stop Saturn, who really can't believe Kuma came to Egghead. He's literally perplexed. He can't even believe it. He literally doesn't believe it. And we saw Kuma tank every attack to save Bonney, and can't speak. Of course, Kuma can't speak, and Bonney even can't speak. But Bonney apologizes to her dad, who gave her life, of course. And of course, Kuma steps in and blocks Saturn's attack, and then takes his leg out of his back and hakis up a punch, which of course is the first time we've ever seen Kuma with haki, which reminds me of Jinbei's first time during Hoka Island against Big Mom. So we're seeing pre-township characters forced to use haki against monumental villain, and Saturn honestly looks shook. Like, this haki punch looks like it's gonna be devastating to Saturn. I really wanted to hit Saturn. If it doesn't, I'm gonna be like, oh man, you gotta stop blue balling me. So yeah, chapter 1103 of One Piece, Kuma versus Saturn, Bonney being saved, Luffy recharging, Kizaru getting back up, Egghead Island incident heating up, guys. So honestly, this chapter was a 10 out of 10 chapter for me. I really enjoyed it. Want to hear your thoughts down in the comment section, guys. Man, One Piece has been on fire lately. You can catch me on Twitter. I'll be talking about it every day on Twitter. I'll be tweeting about One Piece every day now. 2024, new year, new Legend Mac.